Hi everybody, and thanks so much for joining me for today's episode. Now, before I even get started, let me just come straight out and say that today's episode is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be something of a rambling rant, so please be patient with me. And I wasn't even sure if I actually wanted to make today's episode. Well, I was sure that I wanted to make it, it's just I wasn't sure if I should make it. And then I thought to myself, I think the topic is kind of relevant and I'd like to get your thoughts on it. So please feel free in the comments down below, let me know what you think. The Crow was a dark, gothic, action, kind of horror spectacle. It was shot in 1994 by an Australian TV commercials director named Alex Proyas, and it starred the brilliant Brandon Lee, who tragically lost his life while shooting this film. The story basically follows a rock star who comes back from the dead in order to avenge his murder and the murder of the woman that he loves. It wasn't a massive success upon its release, but it has since garnered a huge cult following, and it's left behind this very beloved and respectable legacy. There are hardcore loyal fans all over the world, and I would consider myself one of them. Now, the rumors of a remake or reboot have been on the go since I don't know when. I mean, everybody in Hollywood has at some point been attached to the reboot. Finally, the reboot happened, and it has, as far as I know, recently wrapped. And everybody is excited about it. Except me. Now, the title of this episode suggests that I don't want to see a Crow reboot. Now, let me just explain exactly what I mean by that. It's not that I am completely disinterested in another Crow reboot or that I'm not going to go out and watch it. I certainly am. It's just that I am very wary. It's got nothing to do with the talent involved behind this movie. Bill Skarsgård, who plays the lead role, is one of the most exciting and most dynamic and talented young actors running around Hollywood at the moment. And the director, Rupert Sanders, to be honest, I'm not very familiar with his work. I think I've seen two of his movies, Snow White and the Huntsman and Ghost in the Shell. And to be honest, I think that he displayed a good handling of story, and he certainly shows a flair for visual spectacle. And the original Crow certainly had a lot of visual spectacle. It was one of the differentiating factors of what made that movie stand out. So it's not that I'm against a Crow reboot, it's just that as a loyal fan, I simply don't want to see another lackluster installment in the Crow legacy. Now, as I was outlining today's episode and thinking about why exactly am I so wary about the Crow reboot, a deeper question started to emerge. And it's a question that I would like to pose to you guys out there. And I would sincerely like to hear your thoughts on this. Do we need more remakes and reboots? And I'm not talking about The Crow specifically in this case, but in general. Do we need more remade movies or rebooted movies or reimagined movies? What do these movies actually bring to the table? How do they enrich, if at all, the world of movies? Because in some of the correspondence that I've had with you guys in the comment section, I have started to notice this pattern emerge, and it goes something like this. I am a passionate fan of older movies. The newer movies seem to lack something. Now, I'm not trying to suggest that you or I are these old school fuddy-duds who can't let go of the past and simply do not support the newer movies. It's not that at all. We like the new movies, it's just that a lot of the great ones, and I'm talking about movies like Last Night in Soho, Midsommar, Hereditary, Joker, Parasite. I mean, a lot of great movies are being made, and these movies certainly do hold up against the older greats. It's just that they kind of go unnoticed. But the movies that we are seeing, the movies that do get all of the attention, well, they seem to be these really not bad movies, and not that they're not great movies, but just kind of, just sort of mediocre. And it's in this sort of mediocre realm that I think most remakes and reboots fit. It's not that I have anything categorically against a remake or a reboot. I mean, a lot of them are very well made. A lot of them have, they look slick, they have great talent, great actors, great directors, great writers. It's just that they don't feel fresh and unique and pop. They don't feel like they're risky enough. And great movies, the ones that really last, movies like The Crow, seem to be these movies that did something that no other movie did. Now, of course, not every movie that gets produced has to be this innovative stroke of genius, but there's this intention to tell a story in a fresh way, And a lot of the movies that are out there, the ones that sort of all the streaming services really push and the cinemas and the studios all push, are these kind of like kind of movies, these mediocre ones. Of course, there are some exceptions to this rule. I mean, Halloween bucked that trend in a nice way, but the vast majority of remakes and reboots. So why does a movie get remade? In my opinion, there are basically two reasons why a film will get the remake treatment. The first, and this will probably come as no surprise to you, is that it makes sound financial sense. A successful original is going to have a tied-in fan base, and the fans of the original are of course going to come and watch the remake, so you can expect some ka-ching. The second, and this is actually a noble reason, is that the original left such a deep impact on the filmmaker, and I mean the director or the actors, that they themselves followed this path of movie making. And maybe it was their dream to remake this movie and add to its legacy. Imagine that, being able to say, I am going to add to the legacy of RoboCop or The Wolfman or A Nightmare on Elm Street. You just look at 2010's The Wolfman, 2014's RoboCop, some of the horror remakes, like A Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. I mean, a lot of talent, and not just talent, were pumped into these movies, but also, the people behind these movies were actually fans of the original, and yet the movies themselves simply weren't embraced by fans of the original, nor by fans of movies in general. The movies on their own are kind of made in such a neatly packaged way that they don't seem to shake anything up. And what you end up with is this very slick looking, pumped with talent, predictable disappointment. Now, I don't believe that a remake or a reboot or a sequel, for that matter, will tarnish the legacy of the original. I think that the original stands on its own, powerful and immortal, and nothing is ever going to change that. But I still can't help but feel that these remakes are very often a waste of creative magic. So, before I get to my 3 reasons on why I am wary of the Crow reboot, I'd like to give you a little bit of an anecdote on how I feel remakes, and I use remakes in a loose term now, how they should be treated. This year, a 70s slasher horror movie was released called X. Except, it wasn't made in the 70s, it was made this year. And it is the best horror movie that I've seen this year. In fact, it's probably one of the best horror movies that I've ever seen. And I don't say that lightly. And the coolest thing about it is that it was embraced by older as well as newer fans. And if you've seen X, then you will know that it looked, it felt, it sounded, it practically was a 70s slasher horror movie. In fact, if you started up your chainsaw, threw it into the middle of this movie, you practically had the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, except it's not the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but it's an even better remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was. But at the same time, it was completely original, unique, and fresh, and it popped. You could see that its director, Ty West, loved those films, and he wanted to honor them. And yet, in honoring them, he wasn't ever burdened by those films. He was actually set free by them. So to me, a remake always feels like rewriting a chapter of an existing book. Whereas what Ty West did is that he wrote a new chapter for this book. I know that's a bit of a strange analogy, but to continue with the analogy, I almost feel like filmmakers need to take a page out of Ty West's book. Don't go out and remake a movie, but honor those movies on your own terms. So finally, I'll get to my 3 reasons on why I am very wary about a Crow reboot. Guys, thanks so much for listening to my rant. I really hope that you're still here with me. But the first reason on why I'm so skeptical is that I've kind of lost faith in the series, if that's what you want to call it, regarding The Crow. We've already seen 3 or 4 sequels plus a series. Now, the TV series, it was short-lived, but I felt that Mark Dacascos gave a very, very sincere performance, and also in The Crow, Wicked Prayer, it starred Edward Furlong. I think that he also gave a noble performance. And with that specific movie, the creator of the graphic novel, James O'Barr, was involved in the story of Wicked Prayer, and yet none of the sequels actually lived up to their magic of the original. Kind of like, why fix what ain't broke? We've got the original, let's just leave it at that. I hope that this Crow reboot will change my opinion. Now, my second concern is that you've got to consider when The Crow was made. It was made in 1994, and this was a very particular time in the world. We saw this emergence of a grungy alternative subculture. I mean, on the front covers of magazines like Rolling Stone, you saw the faces of Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder. MTV was littered with bands like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden. This music captured the apathy, the rage, the restlessness of that particular generation. And The Crow definitely was a cinematic representation of all of those feelings. I mean, the film's lead character, Eric Draven, is a rock star in the movie, and he practically looks like he could have been a member of Nirvana. The film's dialogue sounds like lyrics from an Alice in Chains song. And the film's soundtrack, I mean, this was a pioneering, curated specifically for that movie soundtrack, right? It was loud, it was abrasive, it was frenetic. I mean, sure, today you hear that kind of music in movies all the time, but back then you definitely didn't hear it that often. And it wasn't just there because it sounded cool. It sonically paralleled the dark, frantic, grungy, grainy visuals that you were seeing on the screen. It wasn't simply an addition to the movie. It was an extension of the story. So The Crow was for and of its audience. It spoke to that generation in a very particular way that is very, very difficult to articulate and certainly very difficult to replicate. I don't even think that it was deliberate back then, but it simply just did that. So my concern with The Crow, the reboot, whether you're calling it a reboot, because they're saying that it's a reimagining, which is already good news, but is this movie going to be able to speak to its audience in the same way that The Crow spoke to its audience back in 1994? How much of the soul of The Crow are you going to have to compromise in order to update it to a language that this audience is going to relate to? Because remember, you can't stray too far from the feel and the soul of the original Crow, because your movie is called The Crow. Now, last but not least, and to be very honest with you, I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to talk about this, because I wasn't sure that I would be able to treat it with the tact and the respect that this particular topic requires. And then recently, the director of the original Crow, Alex Proyas, came out and said that he is against any remake or reboot of The Crow because he feels that it tarnishes the legacy of Brandon Lee. And I actually agree with him to a point on this matter. And the reason why is, if we want movies to move us, and I know that I want movies to move me, then we need to respect the elements of the movies that move us. And one of those elements, probably one of the biggest elements that moved any fan of The Crow, was Brandon Lee in his final ever performance. Now, Brandon Lee was accidentally shot with a primed blank during one of the pivotal scenes in this movie, and he later tragically passed away from his injuries. Eric Draven, the story's main character, is shot and killed, rises from the grave to make the wrong things right. This is one of the story's main taglines. Now, I find, and I say this with the utmost respect, that there is this heavy, almost dark irony between what happened to Brandon Lee and the character that he played in the very same scene. I mean, the same scene that fatally wounded Brandon Lee, his character, Eric Draven, is shot and killed. And there's this very strange, like I say, dark, almost macabre kind of art imitating life and life imitating art notion going on there. Now, I don't know if I'm being too sensitive about this. I probably am a little, but I do feel that it bears a relevance on any kind of movie you're going to make called The Crow. It needs to be treated in a very sensitive kind of way, I feel, and it needs to be honored in a certain kind of way. And I'm pretty sure that this is what the reboot is going to attempt to do. But I do feel that it's still relevant. When you think of Brandon Lee, you've also got to remember who this 27-year-old man was and what this movie meant to his story. Up until The Crow, he was basically living in the shadow of his very famous, legendary martial arts father, Bruce Lee. He had done a number of pretty respectable B-grade action movies like Rapid Fire. Yet I've seen interviews with Brandon Lee where he expressed a wish to do something different. Now, a lot of action stars also express similar ideas, but with Brandon Lee, you really got this distinct feeling that there was something about him that would allow him to venture beyond the action realm. He had the looks, he had the charisma, and I don't mean to sound airy-fairy about this, but he seemed to have a certain depth about him that would also be used in different kinds of genres. I could easily see Brandon Lee doing something like The Matrix and who knows what else. And I think that's what The Crow also signifies. It also signifies the loss of opportunity and potential for this particular individual. But probably the most potent aspect of all of this for me is when you say the name Brandon Lee, you know, I don't see the face of that muscly guy from Rapid Fire. I see the grungy, white makeup face of Eric Draven. And when you say the name Eric Draven, as big a fan as I am of the graphic novel, you know, I don't see the black and white impression of this Eric Draven. I see the face of Brandon Lee. So to me, and I think also to a lot of fans, Brandon Lee is an integral part woven into the very fabric of what The Crow is, what it means, what it was, and what it probably forever will be. Now again, I'm not saying that Crow, the reboot, is not going to consider any of this stuff. I'm sure that what they want to do is honor the legacy of The Crow and of Brandon Lee, and I certainly hope that they do. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very interested to see this movie. So I certainly wish them all the best of luck. But I did feel that I wanted to express some of my concerns regarding The Crow, as well as also, you know, how I feel about remakes and reboots. So guys, please in the comments let me know what you think. I always like hearing from you guys. On that note, thank you so much for sitting with me throughout this rambling rant. I really appreciate your time. And remember, if you like this kind of content, I've got a lot more coming your way. Hopefully not as rambling as this, but please hit that subscribe button, like this episode, and drop me a word down in the comments. On that note, stay safe, stay happy, stay horror. Have a great week, everyone.